Yes.
Well, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
It's a little after 9:30. I think we'll go ahead and get started, just in case. I have not timed this out, so I have no idea how long this is going to take us. We could be done in 3 minutes. We could be done in 53 minutes. We'll see. But I'm assuming that this conversation will take us quite a ways in this. So, there's all kinds of chairs up here. No need to drag any
All
others.
right.
I think there's a few empties, just
All
in
right.
case.
We tried to get it
Let's
back.
begin first with a quick. Pardon? Oh, coffee's brewing, good. So let's take a quick moment to pray. Gracious God, in our time together, we pray that your Spirit might be present with us, and in this important conversation regarding our church, we pray that your Spirit might lead us to wisdom, to insight, and to be reminded of our faithful witness in the world around us. So we pray that you'll lead and guide us in Christ. Amen. So as I envisioned our time together over the 2 hours that we've kind of programmed, I thought first we'd better make sure that we're all kind of on a historical plane that's even. So we all kind of know what's been driving this conversation and how we've gotten to the point where we're at now, versus just diving into everything that's going on at the moment. So today's going to be a little bit more of a review of some things that some of you may know or have heard from our conversation that we had almost 6 years ago, 5-6 years ago. It's going to be kind of a review in some ways, but some other things that will be added to it as well. Because I just want to make sure we're all on kind of a good solid footing before we get into the conversations about Rob Renfro and Adam Hamilton and the back and forth and the Christmas covenant and what all this means as we go forward. All right? So for the next couple of weeks, going to do some catching up, as well as hopefully some information that will get us to the point where we all feel comfortable with what's going on in the United Methodist Church. Number one is an understanding. Not that you're comfortable with the argument, but that you're comfortable knowledge-wise with what's going on. And number two, that you have an understanding of where St. John's falls in this conversation. Because I think you guys are a good representation of that. Okay? So the question that came to mind for me is why is it taking so long for us to resolve this?
It's Methodist.
Because it's Methodism, right? Okay.
Check our
So-
break at the door.
How many of you know what our structure looks like in the United Methodist Church? Okay. Yeah, it's called our polity. All right? Our polity is our organizational structure as a church. And basically, when Wesley created American Methodism, he modeled it off of the American Constitution in our system. So, there is what's called the executive branch, which is our Council of Bishops. And our Council of Bishops is active bishops and retired bishops worldwide. So it's a large group of people. All right? Council of Bishops are your executive. Then you have your General Conference, which is your legislative. And General Conference is made up of your elected delegates from your regional, your annual conferences, and your central conferences around the world. So we, every 4 years, elect delegates that we send into the General Conference. They work on teams and committees around petitions and legislation, and then they debate it on the floor, and they argue over it, and then they vote on it. And that's how things wind up in this lovely little book that we call the Book of Discipline. All right? So that's our legislative branch. And then we have what's called our judiciary. So we have a judicial council. So anything that transpires at either the jurisdictional level or the general conference level has to go through review at the judicial council to make sure that it falls within the bounds of the Book of Discipline. And they're really literal about that. There's no kinds of interpretive things like what goes on in our Supreme Court. They are really literal about it. If it says thou shalt, then thou shalt. If it says thou shalt not, then thou shalt not. Right? That's how literal judicial council is.
And who
Now-
makes up the judiciary? Who makes
So
up
that's
the-
an elected group of people that are employed by the United Methodist Church, either very rarely is it clergy. It's usually laity, and they're all legal scholars. So, and it's 12, I think, if I remember correctly, is the number of people that are on it. Right? Now, a subset of this, too, are what's called jurisdictional conferences and then annual conferences. So jurisdictional conference. We reside in what's called the South Central jurisdiction, which is made up of Kansas, Nebraska, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Texas, New Mexico. And Oklahoma. Yes, thank you very much. And Oklahoma. So all that kind of South Central area makes up our jurisdiction. Every 4 years, your jurisdictional group delegates that are voted on get together, and their primary business is to elect bishops. That's their primary business, and then to assign them to episcopal areas. Right? So we just had a jurisdictional conference where we had 3 bishops that were elected. They were elected on the first ballot. There's only 2 other times in United Methodist history in the United States that bishops have been elected on the first ballot. Right? And one of them is an African-American woman from Kansas. She is the first African-American woman voted to be a bishop in the South Central jurisdiction. She's being assigned to Louisiana. And one of the other ones is David Wilson. Name sound familiar?
Yes.
District Superintendent for the Oklahoma Indian Missionary Conference. He is the first district superintendent to be elected, first Native American to be elected as a bishop in all of United Methodist history.
Wow.
And he's going to Kansas and Nebraska, so he's going to Great Plains.
So do they elect the bishops that then stay in the South
Yes,
Central?
they stay in the state. Yes, they stay in the South Central. So their authority is this jurisdiction and the appointment within the jurisdiction. And then we have one area that's open. It is West Texas, New Mexico. They did not elect a bishop for that area, and their primary reason is they think at the next general conference there might be a restructuring of annual conferences, so that it might eliminate one annual conference, and we would need a bishop to cover that. So they didn't want to have to force somebody to retire or give up their episcopal office because we had one too many bishops. So they only voted for 3, even though we had 4 areas open. And they'll vote again in 2 years rather than every 4 years, because 2024 will be back on our regular general conference schedule. Annual conference, you guys know what that means. Missouri is its own annual conference. Arkansas is its own annual conference. Great Plains is Kansas, Nebraska. It's one episcopal area or annual conference. Annual conference is where we do the business of our own local churches together. We do that every single year. Linda's been with me to annual conference a number of times. Jenny's been to annual conference before. Elva's probably been to more than she really wants to ever care to tell you she's been to. But that's the business of the church locally, and that's primarily where we decide on things like our budget for the year, for the annual conference, and then appointments. The bishop makes the appointments for the season as well. And then there's the local church, districts and local church. We're in the new Northwest District. We reorganized recently in Missouri to go down from 5 areas to, from 9 areas to 5 areas. Our district superintendent covers the Northwest area and has 100 and some odd plus churches. So he's got all the upper Northwest part of Missouri. No thank you. He's going to get a lot of windscreen time. So, all right. Now, when you think about, again, the question, how do we get to the point where we're at? Most people wonder, why don't the Council of Bishops just resolve this issue for us? Right? Why don't they just take the authority and just decide for all of the church and just make it so? Well, the reason is they don't have the authority to do that. They do not, as Episcopal officers, have executive authority in that capacity. That is the business of the General Conference and the General Conference only. A bishop's basic authority is to set mission and vision for the annual conference for the Episcopal area that they are assigned to and appoint pastors. That's really all they have the authority to do. They don't have authority to make other kinds of changes. They don't have the authority to say, well, you know, I like this part of the Book of Discipline, but I don't like that part of the Book of Discipline, so we'll just got to vote. They don't have that kind of authority. So they don't have the ability as the Council of Bishops to gather together and make executive orders that we then live by. They just don't have that power. That is all the business of the General Conference. Your elected delegates from your annual conferences and your central conferences and your other regional conferences, they gather together and they're the ones that decide on the legislation and they vote on it. The Council of Bishops doesn't even have veto power. Once it's decided by a simple majority, it becomes our legislation that's enacted. Right? So in the 1960s, around 1968 or so, earlier than that, we began the conversation between the Methodist Church and the Evangelical United Brethren Church about becoming one church together. In 1968, a general conference that was proposed and voted on and approved, and in 1968 we became the United Methodist Church. Methodist Church and the Methodist Episcopal Church and the United Evangelical Brethren joined together. If you read our lovely little book of discipline, it has in here the doctrines and the disciplines of both churches. So it has conversation in here around the doctrines of and the history of both the Methodist Episcopal Church and the Evangelical United Brethren Church. There's a simple history of our church in here that's well worth reading if you ever have the time to invest in the 20 or so pages that it is. And I'd encourage you to do so. But that's kind of the starting point. Also,
so why did those discussions happen at the time? What led them to say we need to consider merging?
Since that's way before my time, it's hard for me to answer that. I lean more to our historical. Do you remember by any chance what brought that conversation
the United
together?
Brethren Church were in trouble and getting smaller, and their way of operating and who they were closer to us, and they approached us about joining. That's how I remember it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And believe it or not, when the two churches merged, we had 12 million members worldwide. It's been the height of United Methodism. And we've been on a precipitous decline ever since, as everybody will tell you.
We shouldn't have joined.
Huh?
We shouldn't have joined together.
Yeah. No, Cherry might disagree with that, considering she's a Peruvian. Yeah.
And I really disagree
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. So the other thing that was happening at this time was the sexual revolution in our country. And so that was something that the conservative wing of Methodism, which was still pretty strong in those days, began to recognize, and they began to propose legislation around. So they started putting in legislation primarily more not around heterosexuality, but around homosexuality. And that's where this language started entering our book of discipline around these things. And by 1972, the General Conference had begun to form and actually voted on restrictive language that found itself beginning to encroach into the book of discipline. So if you read paragraph 161, I'm going to read some of these to you so that you understand what it actually says. So paragraph 161, it's called in the social principles, the nurturing community is the title of this, and then it gets to human sexuality. Paragraph G says, we affirm that sexuality is God's good gift to all persons. We call everyone to responsible stewardship of this sacred gift. Although all persons are sexual beings, whether or not they are married, sexual relations are affirmed only with the covenant of monogamous heterosexual marriage. Skip down a little bit, because it goes through conversation about commercialization, abuse, exploitation is where it goes next. And then it goes, we affirm that all persons are individuals of sacred worth created in the image of God. That's our church's stance. All persons need the ministry of the church in their struggles for human fulfillment, as well as the spiritual and emotional care of a fellowship that enables reconciling relationships with God, with others, and with self. The United Methodist Church does not condone the practice of homosexuality and considers this practice incompatible with Christian teaching. That was the first language that entered, 1972. That line there. The United Methodist Church does not condone the practice of homosexuality and considers this practice incompatible with Christian teaching.
Before 1972, was there anything in the Book of Discipline about any kind of sexual?
Just human sexuality.
That was in there.
This is what amended that section.
Okay.
They already had a stance about monogamous heterosexual activity in the bounds of marriage. That was regarding the sexual revolution too. But that language was already there. So Then later we get into other general conferences who pretty quickly begin to add other qualifications in language. So the disqualification for ordination can be found in paragraph 304.3, page 226 of your Book of Discipline, says that if you are a self-avowed and practicing person of same-sex orientation, homosexuality, you cannot be ordained in the United Methodist Church. You cannot be certified as a candidate, commissioned, or ordained.
Did
Yeah.
that come in 1972? Or did that come in later?
I think a subsequent general conference after that. There was a couple of general conferences where they started adding other restrictive language. This is more like 76 to 80 is when this language really begins to add. So they keep you from being ordained. And then the next was paragraph 341.6, page 278, which tells you that you cannot marry somebody if you're an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church. You cannot perform a same-sex union, nor can you officiate one in your church. So we can't even let one take place within the church confines itself. I can't preside over one, and the church can't host one. And then, just to top it off, you've always got to have language as to if you violate this, what will happen to you. That is paragraph 2702.1b, chargeable offenses of the United Methodist Church. Believe it or not, we have that, chargeable offenses. Let's see, I'm going to find that real quick and just tell you what it says. 2702, paragraph 1b. Practices declared by the United Methodist Church to be incompatible with Christian teaching, including but not limited to being a self-avowed practicing homosexual or conducting ceremonies which celebrate homosexual unions or performing same-sex weddings, are considered to be a chargeable offense under the statutes of 2702.4. And there's a statute of limitations on this, by the way. You have to be an active member or retired in still good standing with the church. And they have like 6 or 7 years as the statute of limitations in which to file this. So somebody has to file charges. It's kind of like our statutes of limitations on most crimes that we have. We have kind of a statute of limitations on some of them. But ours is 6 years, I believe, is the max.
So somebody would have to file charges?
Yes. Somebody has to initiate a complaint with the Episcopal office of that particular annual conference or central regional conference. So, but here's the thing. You don't have to be a member of that annual conference. You just have to report it to the bishop that presides over the area where that person is.
You have to be a Methodist?
Yes. Yeah, you do have to be a Methodist member.
But someone from our annual conference
Could complain about, say, Minerva Concaro, who was the bishop in California, I believe, and she found herself on suspension for 2 months because somebody filed 2 different complaints against her. Not about this in particular, although they could have, because Bishop Karen Oliveto came out of her area. And if you don't know, Bishop Oliveto is self-avowed practicing. She's married, and she's now the Episcopal appointee in Big Sky, which is Colorado, Wyoming area.
Which Ridgeford has a lot of right.
Oh, I'm sure he does. And guess what? We just elected in the south, or in the western jurisdiction. They just elected another person that's a self-avowed practicing that is ordained. So yeah, we've gotten ourselves into a conundrum on this because nothing has been done yet. People just simply decided because of an act of conscience they were going to violate the Book of Discipline. And so they, in regions where they don't really want to stick to this all that stringently, they've done what they wanted to do, and nobody's really pressed the issue.
Jim, did you say you have to be a Methodist to bring charges?
To file a complaint.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So some radical couldn't come and, okay.
Unless it
Methodist.
Well, so, yeah, one person's radical is another person's friend
Yeah,
sometimes, but yeah, I mean, so somebody who's non-Methodist can't file a complaint, has to be a Methodist member. And that's one kind of restriction of our polity is you gotta be a part of our church. Everybody understand how we got to that point?
So who were the people that wrote that language? Because I know there's a difference between like the United States and maybe some of the African countries
Oh,
and that kind
well,
of thing.
So honestly,
what- I mean, were there
these are
particular-
petitions that are driven by the, these are petitions that are driven by the conservative wing of the Methodist Church in America. These were not petitions that were driven by central conferences or a regional conference. Those actually formed later on. We've reorganized a couple of different times since this language was actually put in.
I guess just in terms of looking at legislative things, there's almost always a leader who rallies people around their cause or
You
whatever.
know, if you'd asked me that
and
question
who
5
it
years
was.
ago, I could have told you exactly who it is.
Yeah,
No,
or
I can't.
Not by name, but was
there was one particular pastor who was a strong conservative leader at the time that really kind of drove the charge on this. But I can't tell you his name at the moment.
So, what happened to these people who were charged?
Nobody's been charged, other than one guy off the East Coast, Frank Schaefer is probably the one that most all of you remember. He was stripped of his clergy credentials and then was given them back because Bishop Carcaro invited him to come to California and be on staff in her office, in her jurisdictional office, and gave him back his credentials.
And she can do that?
Yeah.
So
So one thing, the other thing that bishops get to do, ordain. Whoever the board of ordained ministry sends forward and approves for ordination, the bishop has to ordain. And so more than likely, he came in, interviewed with their board of ordained ministry, and they affirmed him for receiving his credentials again. He'd already been ordained, but they just affirmed him to receive his credentials again, and the bishop employed
Okay,
him.
and charges haven't been brought against her?
Well, they have. She's on administrative leave right at the moment, but not necessarily for that. There's a couple of other issues that are going on out there. One of them is revolves around Glide Memorial. If any of you are familiar with Glide Memorial in San Francisco, it's a renegade United Methodist Church. I mean, far progressive left renegade. I mean, it's beyond what we can imagine. And there's one particular personality that really controls what goes on there. They have the name United Methodist, but they're just not really all that United Methodist because they just don't pay attention to half of what goes on and half of what's even in here.
And that provided Rob Renfro with examples.
Oh, I'm sure they
Right.
He has probably picked on that one too. You know, we always go to the low-hanging fruit, right? Our 1, 2, and 3 examples we can pick out.
So his argument that the United Methodist Church is not following the Book of Discipline and is not enforcing it is accurate?
What say ye?
Sounds like from what you said that, yeah.
that's what he says, they're not following the rules and there's no consequence, and the future of the church is that far
So
left.
here's the
is what
thing
he
about
said.
it. I mean, you can make logical leaps to extrapolate and say that nobody in the United Methodist Church is following the Book of Discipline. Well, that's inaccurate. There are individuals that, yes, have violated the Book of Discipline. And there are individuals who have not faced charges for that and are still operating as an ordained elder within the United Methodist Church, or an ordained deacon in the United Methodist Church, or someone who's even appointed as into the Episcopal office. But those are individualized cases. It's not as if the whole United Methodist Church is willingly violating the Book of Discipline. You guys know I have a daughter who is in a same-sex marriage, and Jim did not participate. Broke my heart, but I mean, I'm bound by my clergy covenant, and I'm bound by this.
You couldn't go.
And I have to hold those two things in tension. Oh, I was at the wedding. I sat on the front row in my tuxedo. I took pictures. Yes, I was at the wedding.
Are the charges
just
that
couldn't
were being
present.
brought within their own church typically, or are they charges
You
for
know,
someone external to their?
it's usually,
Okay.
most often it's somebody external or a colleague. So like in Frank Schaefer's case, it was another colleague that filed a complaint against him. So the charges actually have to be brought by the Episcopal office in what's called the Committee on Investigation. So every board of ordained ministry in an annual conference has a Committee on Investigation. They're the ones who have to literally write up what the charge is. You make a complaint, and you cite what paragraph of the Book of Discipline that person has violated as your complaint. And then the charges are brought. By
And they
the
can
Committee on
decide whether they
Investigation.
want to bring
Yeah,
charges or not.
They
So,
can. The Committee on Investigation has that power.
yeah, okay.
Wait, and is that committee on investigation,
Clergy and laity.
but
that
is
are
it,
part-
is it the whole Methodist Church, or
No,
does
within
every
your-
jurisdiction have their own?
Actually, within your annual conference.
Oh,
So Missouri has its own Board of Ordained Ministry, and it has its own Committee on Investigation as part of its Board of Ordained Ministry. And so if there's a complaint filed against somebody in the state of Missouri, that's an ordained elder or deacon, that would go to our board, our own board, and then that committee would be the ones that would take it up in consultation with the Episcopal office.
so a jurisdiction, a complaint could be filed against somebody in this jurisdiction, and the board of complaint would say, no, we don't.
Yes?
But
That's it.
but the
Yeah.
same complaint could be filed in a different jurisdiction, and they could say, yes, we're gonna lower the boom on it.
Yeah. There is no one centralized, as you would say, committee on investigation for all of the United Methodist Church. It is something that resides in each annual conference.
And who's on this committee of,
So they are clergy and laity that are part of the board Board of Ordained Ministry.
How long, are they on forever, or how
No.
long is their term?
No. So the max that a person can serve on the Board of Ordained Ministry is 12 years. I did my 12 years. I was on our Board of Ordained Ministry. I did not serve on the Committee on Investigations. I was on a different part of the Board of Ordained Ministry. But I served for 12 years. That's the max that you can serve. So it does have to rotate.
So I assume since they had the structure in the Board of Discipline that people could call to attention an infraction, that was set up previous to the sexuality issue. Previous to that, when they started writing these, don't do this, historically, did the church bring complaints against pastors for other things they did, or is this pretty much centered on sexuality issues that they use that
So
for?
honestly, I would, knowing human nature, the answer to that question is yes. Can I give you specific examples? No.
I mean, I can't imagine, like,
Yeah, I mean, well, there are a lot of other things that you can be, a complaint can be filed against you. If you commit a crime,
mhm.
if you are accused of sexual abuse of any kind, infidelity,
So that could have happened previous to all this?
use of pornography.
Mhm. Okay,
There's a myriad of things that are chargeable.
okay.
That somebody can file a complaint and they are chargeable offenses. And I'm sure with human nature, the way we are with one another, you know, This just seems to be the thing that's most contentious and in our face right now and
Okay.
national.
Okay.
Because it's a broader conversation than just the church.
Mhm.
How long can those charges hang out there? I mean,
Well, once it goes to the Committee on Investigations, I mean, they have a time frame with it they are going to operate. They're not
Right.
just going to let it hang out there. But it
they'll
it
dismiss
took-
it or accept, okay, take action.
I think it took, because Frank Schaefer asked for a public trial, which you can do if you're accused of a complaint, I think it took almost a year to resolve his case, or maybe a little bit longer than that.
So our charges, I mean, I've watched, but not, I've retained a lot of information from the Rob Renfro thing. So he says that there's also, this is just one of 3 issues that he's focusing on. The other 2 are more important to the whole concept of being a Christian or understanding the Bible or something like
Yeah,
that.
so how you interpret the Bible and what is the
Yeah.
primacy of Bible within,
Right.
within
And
the church. And I know that's one of them. I haven't fully watched all the videos yet, so that's my task this week.
Can you bring charges against your a minister because he or she isn't interpreting the Bible
No,
literally?
no.
Fortunately.
Okay.
No, there's other mechanisms by which you deal with that, and that's called your Pastor Parish Relations Committee or your Leadership Board and your consultation form. And the consultation form, you guys get together and say, that person needs to go. That's how you deal with that. Unfortunately.
assigned to another church. Right.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have those kinds of standards. I mean, as I said to someone, in some churches, it's really easy to deal with these kinds of things because the theological vein is really narrow. And nearly everybody that's within that denomination or that kind of theological group, they just espouse the same thing. No matter where you go, it's the same thing everywhere you go. United Methodism isn't like that. We're a really broad tent between conservative to really progressive. And our theological vein of interpretation is really broad as well. And so you're not going to get a consistent kind of interpretation of the Bible across the churches. All of us do it a little bit differently. We all go to the same seminaries. They try to teach you how to do this, but you're not going to come up with the same readings.
Which is why we have the richness in our church, I think, as opposed to some of the others. So that's a good thing.
Are there certain things you have to affirm, though, in the ordination process to be accepted as a candidate?
So, all right. Yes. The answer is yes. Let me find it real quick for you.
Yeah, that's what,
If I can find it.
because Rob talked about that in the videos a little bit.
Ordination questions. Do what?
I'm not
So there is a state. So you've been there. So at annual conference, when the bishop has, well, you haven't actually been there. During what's called the clergy session, which is the executive session, they break us up, clergy and laity at annual conference. During the clergy session, everyone who is a candidate to be commissioned and ordained comes up on stage. And there are historic questions that the bishop asks. And one of them is, will you maintain the doctrines and the disciplines of the United Methodist Church? To which you say yes. If you say no, you don't get ordained. So you say yes. So your yes is supposed to be your yes and your no is supposed to be your no. They don't ask the question, will you maintain it in full? It will be complete. They just ask if you'll maintain it. And I think some people find leeway in that language to say, I'll maintain this, but I don't know if I'll maintain that. Right, kind of thing. So that's where Renfro's going to lean towards, is that's a particular question that's a historic question that's asked. It's been asked since Wesley ordained.
You'd have to get rid of a lot of churches then,
No, you have to get rid of a lot of pastors.
a lot of pastors.
Because it's really difficult to maintain all of this.
Yeah.
I mean, there's stuff in here that even I don't know that I probably somewhere along the lines crossed a boundary on because it's buried somewhere in some language somehow.
So does the book of discipline only apply to pastors, not laity?
No, it applies to the whole church, pastors and laity. Believe it or not, a lay person can have a complaint filed against them.
That's what my next question.
Yes, they can. So if you've got someone in your church that has, let's say your financial secretary conducts some kind of malfeasance, and even though you want to prosecute them through the police, you can also file a complaint against them through the church. And what that will do is it'll preclude them from ever being a member of another United Methodist church. And that's,
Okay, so
and that's
what if-
kind of a way of protecting.
So what if a couple was, a gay couple was married elsewhere and came to our church to participate?
So the pastor has, believe it or not, authority to decide who can be and who cannot be a member of a United Methodist church. That's probably a good thing and a bad thing.
But the discipline would say they are welcome to do
Yes.
in church as well as you being that we respect.
Even
Yeah,
though
so
they're-
I want to read a couple things to you.
Oh, messages.
I don't like reading things all that much, but actually, I thought that was interesting because we're in this conversation and then we have other language in our book of discipline. So, paragraph 140, this is section 6 in our mission and ministry of the church. The title of this section is Called to Inclusiveness. We recognize that God made all creation and saw that it was good. As a diverse people of God who bring special gifts and evidences of God's grace to the unity of the church and to society, we are called to be faithful to the example of Jesus' ministry to all persons. Inclusiveness means openness, acceptance, and support that enables all persons to participate in the life of the church, the community, and the world. Therefore, inclusiveness denies every semblance of discrimination. The services of worship of every local United Methodist Church shall be open to all persons. The mark of an inclusive society is one in which all persons are open, welcoming, fully accepting, and supporting of all other persons, enabling them to participate fully in the life of the church, the community, and the world. A further mark of inclusiveness is the setting of church activities and facilities accessible to persons with disabilities.
Was
We're called to
that,
be inclusive.
when was that?
But not to pastors.
I couldn't tell you when this was added.
So, I'm trying to rectify that.
No, you can't.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you.
An embedded contradiction.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
I would say.
Which is one of the problems that they've got right now, basically. Isn't that really
So,
kind of the
hold on.
Are
core?
you familiar with a case of Thomas Brewin?
So I want to read you one other paragraph.
Please.
This is from the Social Community, paragraph 162J. The title of it is Equal Rights Regardless of Sexual Orientation.
Read that again?
Equal rights regardless of sexual orientation.
Different committee wrote that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Certain basic human rights and civil liberties are due all persons. We are committed to supporting those rights and liberties for all persons regardless of sexual orientation. We see a clear issue of simple justice in protecting the rightful claims where people have shared material resources, pensions, guardian relationships, mutual powers of attorney, and other such lawful claims typically attendant to contractual relationships that involved shared contributions, responsibilities, and liabilities and equal protection before the law. Moreover, we support efforts to stop violence and other forms of coercion against all persons regardless of sexual orientation. Now, this deals primarily with rights within our Constitution and our legal system, not the church. Did you get that? United Methodist Church and its witness stands for people in their legal rights within our country, in our legal system within our country, not within. This doesn't deal with the church.
Why is it even in there?
So that paragraph.
Because there's a general commission on race and justice, and this is part of their language that they put in here. Because there's the rights of men, rights of women, rights of immigrants, rights of persons with disabilities. All these things are all in this as our social principles.
And that's with federal or state?
This is pushing on both.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is just the church's stance that we believe in the equal rights of people at the federal and at the state level because of these things, to intermarry as they choose.
So that could be in conflict with another country's laws and so forth. It could, which could, you know,
Yes.
some of the other countries that have different
Yep.
Interpretation.
stands on legality, particularly with the homosexual issue, that is a legal thing in some countries. So
And
that's-
next time we get together, we'll talk about that because that's part of the Christmas covenant. If you've looked that up yet and read about it, that's part of the drive of the Christmas covenant is that this book needs to be more contextual to regions, not generalized to the whole Universal United Methodist Church worldwide, because our politics and our social mores are different worldwide. They're not homogeneous. So there are countries in Africa where being gay or homosexual is against the law, and there's severe punishments.
So
I believe in one country it's against the law to the point that they could put you to death.
This section is kind of saying, whatever's going on out there in the culture, we're going to accept that. We're going to.
Well, what's allowed by law?
Well, I think there's certain things that we believe are just fundamental human rights, and they put them into basic categories. Okay.
So the discipline does not talk about the inherency of life. It has more of a contextual
Yeah. So.
language about that.
Yeah, so I'll just read you, let's see, this is the, so this is the, so let's just say from your church of origin. So from what's called the Confession of Faith of the Evangelical United Brethren Church, page 73, that's in here. The Holy Bible, which is article number 4. We believe the Holy Bible, Old and New Testaments, reveals the Word of God so far as it is necessary for our salvation. It is to be received through the Holy Spirit as the true rule and guide for faith and practice. Whatever is not revealed in or established by the Holy Scriptures is not to be made an article of faith, nor is it to be taught as essential to salvation. Okay? Doesn't say that it has to be articulated or interpreted in the exact same way.
And is that broader than the EUB?
That's the EUB.
There's the a little more conservative.
Yeah, so in the United Methodist Church, Article 5 is titled, Of the Sufficiency of the Holy Scriptures for Salvation. The Holy Scripture containeth all things necessary to salvation, so that whatsoever is not read therein, Wesley wrote this, by the way, nor may be provided thereby, is not to be required of any person that it should be believed as an article of faith or be thought requisite or necessary to salvation. In the name of the Holy Scripture, we do understand those canonical books of the Old and New Testament of whose authority was never in any doubt in the church. The names of those canonical books are, and then they just list them.
But it's interesting that you don't add things
No.
in the Bible.
Add or take away.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so.
I have already watched a number of the videos, but I didn't get them all watched, and I didn't know the background of Renfro before I watched him. Can you give us any? How long?
I'll look up his biography for you, and we'll talk about it a little bit more next time. He's
I'm just wondering.
he's been in ministry for probably at least 30 years.
Uh-huh.
He's, I believe, at the Woodlands is where he is at, which is.
Well, it didn't show that on the internet last time. It just shows he's the news.
Yeah, he's with the Good News.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know that he has a
Yeah, he's
assignment as far
he
as
may
his
not
church
now.
right now.
He's an I believe he's an ordained elder.
So how long ago did he kind of take up this
Good News Magazine's been around since 1968.
And they have always,
That's when it started. The guy that started the whole petition around the language to change also created the Good News movement.
so that has been their driving force all these years.
Pretty much. Those the three things that he's going to lift up. Yeah.
Okay, that, I just wanted to know, because if I watch some more of them, it's helpful to know, like, where did this guy come from and when did he start on this? Was it last year or?
No, he's been at it a while. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to read you a couple of other things.
What's the, what you, I should have asked this question earlier. Something you read previously. How is the Global Methodist Church's Book of Discipline different from that?
Actually, I've not read the Global Methodist Book of Discipline. I'm trying to think if I know there's a copy out there. I've not acquired it. I haven't read it.
I mean, it's the only difference that they've taken out.
Probably the only difference is around the sexuality language. They kept it in, and they probably have added things in there regarding strict measures against anybody who violates it. They may have amended other things, but this has been their biggest complaint by far. Is the human sexuality issue, how we've not dealt with it.
One of the things that one of the bishops of Sierra Leone, when we were on a missionary trip over there, told us was that their problems are very different than ours. You know, having a heterosexual marriage versus gay marriage is totally not a problem to them. The big problem is polygamy, with men having 5, 6, 7 wives. They have to deal with that before they can even start.
That's where we're
The
going.
future of the Methodist Church.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's just,
It's amazing what we can extrapolate out into the worst case scenarios of things, right? We always we jump to the most illogical of scenarios. Right? That's where the Methodist Church is headed, is we're all going to be involved in polygamy.
Somehow basing a faith on fear doesn't seem like a very good way.
Yeah.
It gets a lot of
So-
politicians
Most men
elected,
can't
so
handle
fear
fire,
doesn't
much
Requirements that we abide by the scriptures. Jesus said, you know, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, but I say it to you, love. In other instances, he also revised the Old Testament in a positive Christian way. So you do have this comment in the Old Testament about forbidding homosexual relations. Is it possible that Jesus would have had, with his endorsement of all his creatures of God and joint creatures, that he would have said, but I say unto you?
Wouldn't we like to know?
When we all get to heaven, we can ask that question. Because it's not something, it's not something that Jesus dealt with, even though Roman practices of pederasty were prevalent in his day. And pederasty was wealthy men who would take poor young boys and use them as sexual toys until they got to a point where they didn't desire them anymore, and then they would just cast them out on the streets. So it was an abusive form of sexuality. And that was dominant in Roman culture, even in Jesus' day.
That said, but an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth was pretty strict kinds of relationships in society, and he radically modified it.
Yeah, he was one who had the famous line that you should love your enemies. And, You're right. He changed a lot of things and the dynamics of it. Unfortunately, this is one of the things that he didn't give us clear definition on.
No question.
Maybe he didn't see it was gonna be a problem.
It wasn't for him to do.
Because of love your neighbor.
Yeah. So a couple of other things that I want to just remind you of. You know we have general rules, right? We have 3 general rules in the United Methodist Church. Do you know what they are by any chance? Bishop always has fun with this. He says, do you know the 3 general rules and can you recite them for me? No. So, first one is do no harm. By doing no harm, avoiding evil of any kind, especially that which is most generally practiced as. And there's a long list that you can read. It is things like not taking the Lord's name in vain, not profaning the day of the Lord, not being drunk, holding slaves, fighting, quarreling, brawling, buying or selling goods that you do not pay the duty on, or your taxes, giving or taking things on usury, uncharitable, unprofitable conversation, doing to others as you would not have them do to you. Right? And on and on and on. Even putting on gold and costly apparel is in here. Yeah, well, so much for this jacket. I'm that kind of thing. All right. So I guess Wesley was against dressing up for church. Maybe.
So
All right. So do no harm. Do only good. By being in every kind merciful after your power, as you have the opportunity, do good for every possible sort and as far as possible to all persons. To their bodies, to their souls, by doing good, especially to those that are in your household of faith, being diligent and fruitful and frugal in the gospel, by not blaming others. Maybe we should read that again. By all possible diligence and frugality, that the gospel be not blamed, right? By running with patience the race that's set before you. And then the third is, attend upon all the ordinances of God, such as public worship, ministry of the word, either read or expounded, the supper of the Lord, family and private prayer, searching the scriptures, fasting or abstinence. These are the general rules of our societies, all of which are to be taught, to be observed, even in this written word, which is the only rule and the sufficient rule both for our faith and practice. Yeah, so, recent history. General Conference 2016. This is where this really came to a head for us, 2016. There were proposals that would have driven us to some compromises. And the compromise would have been that we could become more contextual as a church, meaning instead of thou shalt not or thou shalt, we were going to strip out the thou shalt not language. Thou shalt not ordain, thou shalt not marry, thou shalt not host. We were going to strip all that out and put it in as you shall or shall not. You may or may not. That's the whole idea. It's how do you get this down to its more contextual to the church and let the church body collectively decide how they want to have a faithful and public witness to their neighborhood. Well, that got resoundingly rejected because the WCA had a strong ground game in the African continent. They went there and sold them on the idea that this was going to destroy the church. The Wesleyan Covenant Association is the precursor to the Global Methodist Church. Rob Renfro, Good News, they're all part of the Wesleyan Covenant Association and now the Global Methodist Church. They had a really strong ground game. So they got everybody in Africa convinced they needed to vote against any legislation that was going to propose changes to the Book of Discipline. They actually got them to vote on language that made it even more restrictive. And that now we're going to start really pushing for chargeable offenses against people who violate this. We want people held accountable.
Did they have any other incentives besides just talking this up?
So what I understand was there was some kind of financial incentive behind this as well, but it never materialized. They made promises that they evidently couldn't keep. And so 2016, that's also the big cry where Adam Hamilton and a couple of others, Mike Slaughter and him, they got together. They stood up on the floor of the General Conference and really ballyhooed all of this and tried to present some logical arguments as to why we should vote against these things. We should enact less restrictive language. And they just basically got listened to but not heard. It resoundingly got voted down. So that's what precipitated our special general conference in 2019. We were still trying to figure out how to get through all of this and get something resolved. And so they called a special general conference in 2019 in St. Louis to deal with just this issue alone. No other legislation was presented. Because general conference is usually 12 days and it's filled with all kinds of conversations regarding the broader church. It's not just about human sexuality. It's about all kinds of stuff that's in here. Petitions on race, gender, ordination, fair and equitable treatment of this or that, or recognition, or there's all kinds of legislation that comes out of our various committees. And so they've got to deal with all of this in that 12 or so day period of time. 2019 was solely about human sexuality. And that's really when we got to the point where, the WCA, a stronger presence in Africa, some of the other central conferences, regions, they again voted all of this down. And that's when people like Adam Hamilton and others got up and said, we really want our council bishops to take leadership on this. And the council bishops had to push back and say, that is not our role. We do not have the authority. It's this body that needs to figure it out. Which some people saw as an abdication. But if you're not given the authority to do these things by this, you can't do it. It would have been overturned anyway, because somebody would have brought it to the judicial council and challenged it. Whatever the bishops decided, what the judicial council would have overturned, because it doesn't fall within our doctrines and our discipline. The bishops aren't given the power to change this. So it wouldn't have worked anyway. So 2020 was supposed to be our next general conference to deal with this. Pandemic, no general conference. 2022, supposed to be general conference, which most of us here in America could have made. But people in Philippines, Africa, places like that could not, because we still have restrictions regarding travel into the country at the time, and you had to be vaccinated to get here, and vaccinations aren't as easily available in other parts of the world as it is here. So now we're into 2024. That'll be our next general conference. And there is good chance that this is going to change in 2024, because the African bishops and the African delegations have figured out that the WCA sold them a bill of goods. If you have not read it, the African bishops recently produced a letter and signed it. All African bishops except for one signed the letter and said the WCA in the Good News Movement and the Global Methodist Church are to cease and desist all activities on the African continent.
Ooh.
You are not welcome here, because their number one thing when it comes to the African church is unity. As Tom Berlin said recently at Leadership Institute, we argue over these things on the peripheral, and we get heated in our debates about this. On the African continent, it is tribal, and it can lead to war. Think about Rwanda. Right? They don't argue about this as a debate. They argue about this tribally. And it could literally lead to death and destruction in places. And so that's why the African bishops stood up against the WCA and said, you're not welcome here anymore, because you're dividing our church.
So does that mean they don't have any
Your goal is to
global?
divide us.
They don't have any global.
Well, they may have some. Every annual conference gets a choice to decide whether they want to stay with the United Methodist Church or if they want to go to the Global Methodist Church.
Because that was already done. That was already set up.
So as part of the disaffiliation process that's in here, that was the other thing that was proposed at General Conference, was a disaffiliation process, and that also is contentious, because most of the folks that are on the other side of this want to leave, they want to retain their property, and they don't want to have the financial ramifications that come with that. And if you don't know what it is for our annual conference, if you want to disaffiliate, you have to pay 2 years of apportionments, plus all of your pension liabilities. So for every pastor who's been appointed to your church, there's a pension liability. if they're still alive, or if their spouse is still alive. There's a pension liability for that. And so there's a formula that they have to figure out what that pension liability would be. And if you have been given any kind of a grant from the annual conference, say from the Congregational Development Board, they gave you a $100,000 grant of some kind, and it's within a certain window, you have to pay that grant back.
So did all these the ones that chose the other, what's the name of it?
Global Methodist Church.
Did they all do that?
Yeah.
All those churches did that, and they are no longer affiliated with,
No longer affiliated with the United Methodist Church.
and that's
But
what
then they
went.
have to apply to affiliate with the Global Methodist Church. They don't automatically let you in. And some of them decided not to go with the Global Methodist Church. Some of
Oh,
them
that's right, they
decided
made their own
Some of them
independent.
have decided that they might want to commune with the Free Methodist,
Mhm.
which are even stricter to try to get into,
Hmm.
or just simply be a non-denominational community church.
Okay.
And one of his points in the later video is you have to disaffiliate now because you can't trust the Methodists. They'll make it even harder and more expensive after 2023.
Yeah, I saw that.
Well, so, I mean, if you read the disaffiliation language originally that was put in there, I mean, the United Methodist Church was going to give the Global Methodist Church a healthy sum of money. It's not like the Global Methodist Church was going to have to come up with all of this to give to the United Methodist Church. Actually, we were going to seed them with, I believe, around $25 million.
Why?
Because part of that is pension money for their pastors. So it would come out of the pension fund and things like that to give to them to manage their own pension. Since they're not going to be a United Methodist clergy member, that's the thing, is if you get into this disaffiliation process as a United Methodist clergy, you have to give up your credentials to join because they're a different denomination than us.
So you're giving up your pension?
You give up, well, yeah. No, you don't give up your pension. You give up your future contributions to it from the United Methodist Church. Your pension will go with you to the Global Methodist Church. That's the proposal. But that's got to be enacted. Right now, those guys don't have, they have pension claim, but it'll be difficult for them to get it anytime soon. They'll have to wait until they
So
recover retirement.
what if your church disaffiliates and then they don't affiliate with anybody else and they stay as a non-denominational, then what?
I'm not sure how, I'd have to ask our pensions guy how they're handling that. They probably roll that into like a 401k or something like that for you. Some kind of 401(b) that's self-managed. It's just that you'll no longer be managed by Westpath.
Do we know how many of those global churches there are with their membership?
I don't know. Haven't looked
Is
at
it just in the United States or other countries? And
Well, it's predominantly here.
mostly
Even though
Texas.
they're global, they're trying to convince other people to go with them. But they might get a few, they might pluck a few in Africa, maybe the Philippines.
Is it likely distributed geographically, like more of those disaffiliated churches in the South? Or
There was one annual conference in Texas that was talking about disaffiliating.
So the whole conference would just.
Yeah, believe it or not.
Every
yeah,
church.
An annual
has-
conference can disaffiliate.
Is it
So what
one in
happens,
South
yeah, so what happens though is not every church has to disaffiliate. The annual conference can disaffiliate, and then the churches that want to stay affiliated with the United Methodist Church would then be reshuffled into another annual conference. Because if we have an annual conference that leaves our jurisdiction, we'll have to redraw the boundaries. Just because, let's say, the South Texas Annual Conference around Houston area wants to leave, doesn't mean the United Methodist Church is going to leave that uncovered. It'll just be reorganized to cover that area, and any United Methodist churches that want to remain.
So we got a letter from our bishop that said, we're staying,
Oh, yeah.
and please stay.
Yeah.
So our annual conference is not.
We have a few churches that are in the disaffiliation process. We have 3 that sued the annual conference, and they sued over the financial aspect.
It is 10:35.
Yeah.
Probably should let our pastor go.
So-
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
So next week we'll cover the videos and all the fun of it.